Somos instead, not these guys.
It's always a pleasure to host Mr. Simone O'Brien. So I thank you so much for coming out to hear what he has to share with us. And I'm going to just bring the house lights down, and as the young guys I volunteer with in juvenile detention would sometimes say, that's it.
Thank you, I think. So my name is Simone, and I'm going to jump right into it and say, a few months ago, I was with a friend who met someone who they politely asked, do you know Simone? They replied, oh, the writer. And I was like, so chuffed. And realized that it had been an impossible dream of mine, that I hadn't even realized that. I just did what I could. So I found a way to write which works for me. Short stories of events from my life that pop up into my mind, and I try to share in words honestly. Next, man, I've been doing this one a month for 6 years and have about 65, 70 of them. Bruce Mack, our MC, and a true man of weight, liked my stories and asked me to do a reading, which I did, of stories that were written about my childhood. And at the end of the show, out of my mouth popped, come back for the next chapter in the saga that is my life. Liverpool in the 60s. And here it is, finally. Seeing Liverpool fall of 1960, we join our protagonist in his John period. And just turned 17. I want to say thanks to Arwen, my editor, who will have a table by the door where you can get a copy of the link to my site, and you can see my story, SOB, How I Got My Names. And Hannah, my baby, thank you for that great poster. She really gets me.
Yes, yes, yes.
Heads up, I will do a tiny bit of song and dance. I was just a working boy, Northern England way. Now I'm in the big time, in the USA. Okay. First story. It's called Mozart Street. I didn't know why Mum was crying. This was the day that I had waited all my childhood for. I was barely able to breathe, because any minute now I would be free to live my life. I gave her a hug, because that was the thing to do, but still didn't understand, as I'd never seen her cry before. But it meant nothing. I felt nothing, just that I could not let anything stop me. These days I think of myself as an empathic person, sensitive to the feelings of others, but that day, while not wanting to give her any stress, all I could do was to go. So I left without a word, Mom still crying. I had my 2 suitcases packed, the sun was going down, and I was headed into the setting sun to join my new life. We lived at the top of Moss Grove, number 22. That's 11 houses to the dividing line between us Catholics on the east and them Protestants on the west side of Lodge Lane. Ironic, our streets on our side were named after live plants, and their side after dead composers. Moss Grove, Mozart Street. I had no idea till much later that the lodge referred to is the Orange Lodge. Look it up. William of Orange, Battle of the Boyne, started 300 years ago and still going, at least every Easter in Liverpool. Over that little rise and downhill to Princess Street, my new home. Mozart Street was unknown territory, but the bags were too heavy to take the usual safer but longer road. The street was deserted, thank God. Each little two up, two down had a window flush with the front door, flush with the pavement. Through their curtains I could see the sickly blue light of a TV in every home. They were all watching the same show. I couldn't make out the words, but the theme song told me it was Coronation Street. Now the longest running soap opera in the world, but then just starting out, and it was the hottest thing, especially to the people of Northern England, because it was set in Manchester, the next city over from Liverpool. I must have known, even subconsciously, that this was my window of opportunity, but there was not a soul on the street. The pain in my puny shoulders grew. 2 suitcases. So I just figured one of them was my new record player. Nearing the end of the now dark street, a new light came on. Not a TV or house light, but in the basement at the rear of one of the townhouses on Princess Street, running across in front of me. A multicolored light, just like the cartoon theater my mum would take me to now and again. As I drew close enough, I could see it was an aquarium of tropical fish in a dark room. And as soon as I had figured it out and was in awe, a boy a little younger than me came into the shot and bent over to tend the fish. I liked him right off. Clearly, this was a taste of my new and colorful life in this neighborhood. He's leaving home after living alone for so many years. What's up, Doc? Suffering succotash. I thought a putty cat. A creeping up on me. I did. I saw a putty cat. As plain as he could be. My waking dream on my first of my new life on Prince's Avenue. Also, if I could have looked past my nose and through my window, I would have seen leaves. I am living on a street with living trees. Then rising up above, I see a mile-long Prince's Avenue with a double row of giant chestnut trees, sheltering a 12-foot wide horse path. And if I had to go back 100 years, I would be on the most desirable street in Liverpool to live. I called it Princess Avenue, as in tiara, because I had never read it, but it was Princess with an apostrophe Avenue, street and road, named for Queen Victoria's first child, Edward, Prince of Wales. Now if I went back to the 1800s, I could drive my horse into Princess Park right next door at the end of the avenue and toss my top hat to my nouveau riche neighbors on a Sunday morning. In 1960, it was a colorful mix of many cultures and many races. In the 1980s scene, race riots, and the area is now known as Little Holland. I shared a tiny kitchen with a man from Ivory Coast who spoke little English. He taught me, this is God, while tapping the stove with a wooden spoon, and the sink, and the pans. This is God, this is God. What an education I'm finally getting. Next story, hedgehog. Within weeks of leaving myself in post, fear-induced childhood, house arrest, here I was, thanks to an ex machina event, living a completely different life, just half a mile from my old home. This is what being grown up feels like? Who knew? Years later, I would learn the euphoria I felt was breaking out all over the world, and I had just happened to land on the tip of one of those growth pulses. Liverpool, full of 60, just 17. A few weeks later, the scene is interior of a well-proportioned room. Floor-to-ceiling windows, about 2 feet below the high ceiling, ran a picture rail, but no paintings, near sunset. I believe I was in the flat of Sami Abdullah, first generation Arab Scouser. About 9 or 10 of us were sitting in an oval grouping of couches and armchairs. Next to me, some guy, perhaps Okinayo, was building a spliff, which I learned consisted of 3 zigzag rolling papers licked into one large rectangle. On top of cigarette tobacco, he crumbled. After heating it with a lighter flame, a hunk of, I also learned, Afghani hashish. Yes, we were an international bunch. The ritual, while appearing English proper, had an ancient feel to it. The spliff was passed clockwise, each taking a deep lungful. Thank God I'd learned how to smoke cigarettes a month earlier. Seriously, some polite conversation, but the attention was on Sammy, who performed a kind of magic with a flashlight that shot a narrow beam of light at a 1-foot square mirror balanced on a picture rail across from him. In turn, the light beam flashed to another identical mirror behind him, which started its own zigzag back and forth all around the room. The mirrors were placed in such a deliberate manner that the result was very hypnotic and effective. Shaman Sammy had clearly put a lot of time and energy into this brilliant creation. It would be some years before light shows became commonplace. This was yet another first for me. I left Sammy's thinking, that was nice. Finally I had friends who I liked. I felt really good, but I admit I had expected to feel something greater from the hashish. However, this was still the most unique event in my new independent life. A short walk and I was at the gate of my new home, and stopped before opening it as I saw something at my feet. And maybe from the Wind in the Willows kids book, as I had never seen one in real life, I knew instantly that it was a real hedgehog. I bent down, picked it up, and held it in the palm of my hand. Not painful at all. It was delightful, in fact. Just then a breeze picked up, and as it ruffled my fine hair, I heard it ring. Yes, ring. It was as if all the hairs on my head had become strands of glass, and all of them were playing a delightful chime song, just for us. I was transported. I opened the gate, and as I put little Spike down on the soil beneath the privet hedge, an appropriate place for a hedgehog, I thought. This ran through my mind. I am never going to drink alcohol like my parents. I am a hashishi. The gods laughed. Here we go. Oh, time for another song. In our Liverpool home, in our Liverpool home, we speak with an accent exceedingly rare, live under a statue exceedingly bare. If you want a cathedral, we've got one to spare in our Liverpool home. Okay, Liverpool. English, Liverpool English. We call ourselves Scousers. And I'll explain that in a minute by saying lobscouse, fish stew of the Vikings, who donated my red beard that I had in my youth. And there was Irish stew made with mutton, which the Irish brought with them to Liverpool. And in Liverpool, it was made into scouse, just scouse, with beef, good English beef. That's what we call ourselves, Scousers, not Liverpudlians, Scousers. And you know, Scouse is the English spoken that today sounds very like the back streets of Dublin. Okay, the statue. A large naked man placed over the entrances to Lewis's department store that nobody noticed except for the occasional groups of giggling girls who probably were there just for the thrill of looking up his skirt, which he didn't have. Okay, cathedrals coming later. So Liverpool is in the county of Lancashire, west coast of northern England. Liverpool is a seaport, and Manchester is down the River Mersey, has the Royal Cotton Exchange. They were the foci of the Industrial Revolution. Mills across the south of Lancashire, climate perfect for weaving cotton, picked by black American slaves, woven by Irish serfs who had some rights but no chains, lots of streams to make the steam for the engines, spun and wove to spin and weave, and ran the first passenger train in the world between Liverpool and Manchester. In a hard day's night. Okay, further down Princess Road, where it took a right and turned from a boulevard into a regular road, was a building that was painted white. I hadn't noticed this till I was told to go there on a certain night to dance. I had never danced, ever. The thought of holding a girl, finally, was so charged I could barely move my feet. But hormones were driving that night. I entered the Polish social club. That was dark, save for a table by the basement door. I paid my entrance fee and stepped downstairs. Here I must ask you, have you watched The Crown on Netflix? Specifically, Victory in Europe Night, 1945. That's the whole of London is celebrating the end of World War II for them. The princesses, Margaret and Elizabeth, now it's princesses, dressed in their khaki uniforms, sneaking out of Buckingham Palace and joining their high-class friends at the Ritz. Elizabeth leaves the Foxtrot Ballroom to go to the loo. As she starts back upstairs, she bumps into a black U.S. Air Force sergeant, also in uniform, who asks where she's going. And as she turns, he says, "You should come down here," pointing at her door. "This is where all the fun is at." Later, she does. This is where the BBC has a shot that could have been of me this night. As she steps down below the ceiling, then bends to peer into the shot, her eyes wide as we cut to the sergeant and his pals, wildly jitterbugging. Not stopping as he spots her, just waving her down to a reality that she probably would never have experienced without Herr Hitler. Cut to me, and my POV is of a totally dark room lit only by a Technicolor Jamaican steel drum band and packed with gyrating bodies. The floor is so packed, I was sucked into its maw and pushed by the will of the dancers into the arms of a beautiful black girl. First dance, first girl in my arms ever. No fear, no need for dance lessons. No room to move other than to sway with the music against each other. As the mighty sparrow might say, back to back, belly to belly. I don't give a damn 'cause I done it already. We stayed locked through the next piece, How High the Moon. Then I ran, overwhelmed, overjoyed, over the moon. I'm going to show you the depths. I'm going to watch this, very complicated. Can you see how dynamic it is? It was incredible. Hey, sit down. Okay. think I have to mention the Ex Machina event, which allowed me to live this new life. A careers teacher decided, as I was just starting to learn after a childhood in the church school, he arranged for me to attend the Liverpool College building. I had little interest in anything other than getting away from home, so I said, yes, this is what I was doing to be free. But everything in my new life was interesting. And I even led something at the building college. Economics. Pouty mouth Mr. Button taught. Oh, I gotta put my glasses back on for this. Dressed in his knitted wool vest with pockets for his cigarettes. Everybody was smoking in the class. I knew it intuitively. I would have choked to death if I hadn't learned how to smoke. Well, this is Mr. Button, and he's teaching economics, and this is what I learned. With his cigarette constantly in his mouth, never except to change to another cigarette, always the same cigarette in his mouth. He'd say, "It's economics is all a matter of balance. It's a balance between supply and demand." That's it. Oh, and in the best part of the building college was the practical. Plastering and plumbing, etc. The magic of using a blowtorch to melt lead, to wipe a joint to turn a straight lead pipe into a T pipe was just alchemy. Me making something with my hands. Yes, I know, but my whole childhood was drinking from lead pipes and teething on the lead paint. It never hurt me, I don't think. Well, maybe. Hope Street, I gotta mention this, because that's where the cathedrals are. You thought I was gonna forget, didn't you? So, Hope Street is on the south side is a huge Anglican cathedral made of red sandstone, the native rock of Liverpool, and it was the biggest cathedral in Europe when I was there, and magnificent, just so powerful. And they were still working on it 80 years after they started. When I was there, if you went, you could hear the chink, chink, chink of the chisels on the rock. And at the other end of Hope Street, the Catholics threw up their cathedral all weekend. Nobody even noticed. Where did it come from? And they called it, in typical Scouser humor, the teepee, because it looked kind of like a teepee. And instead of lodge poles, they had double I-beams, and in between, blocks of glass, but not clear glass or plain glass. They were colored glass. We got this technicolor theme going on. It's like, this is reality. You can't make this stuff up. From the college, just half a block down, I would go to the Catholic cathedral when the sun was shining, which it did a lot that time because it was an Indian summer in the fall of '60, and I would stand under the yellow lights and just bathe in yellow, or the red light and bathe in red. Magical. You should try it if you ever go there. And what I liked a very, very lot about Hope Street was that the next block down from the building college was the College of Art, where John and Paul went the year before I was there at the other college. And I really didn't like the company of the builders as much as I liked the company of the artists. I liked artists. I'd never met any before. These were really cool people. Not only that, there was girls. There was not many girls studying plumbing in 1960. So there were girls, and there was a little pub called Ye Oldie I thought, you know what I'm talking about. They put an E on the end of everything. Ye olde crack, which is an old Irish term for a meeting place. And it was in a crack, a little narrow street between the two colleges. And that's where I love to go, hang out with artists and meet girls. Even go for lunch break, where we'd have a couple of pints before going back. That made the smoking a lot more, easy to take. Okay, here we go. It's a longer story, so get comfortable. That one dance at the Dompolsky Club broke the spell, and within a week I had my first date with Susan Stanley. It was my first would you like to go out date ever. Maybe the last. Confidence high, ready to roll in the hay, I took her to the only place I knew to take anyone, Dompolsky, the White House. Apart from the 5 minutes of bliss on the dance floor, I hardly knew it at all. But I knew there was a bar somewhere, and had learned from Coronation Street, of course, that this was the way to get a girl to have sex with you. Get her tipsy. Susan Stanley was very different from the little Jamaican girl I danced with. More like me, in fact, although an older woman, 18 to my 17. Beautiful in a willowy model sort of way, I took Susan to the bar on the second floor. My replay app has the two of us alone in the middle table of a large, empty white room with high windows. Probably because it was more afternoon than evening. And so we drank. Vodka. I had drunk liquor before one New Year's Eve when Jack Frost's dad insisted we drink a shot. Jack spit his into the coal fire and the tongue of flame almost took his face off. I drank mine. We drank vodka shot for shot. My plan with Susan did not go so well, though. As she drank me under the table, you heard that coming, didn't you? Fortunately, she managed to get me home and to my room up on the third floor and tucked me into bed, but did not take advantage of me, unfortunately, as I passed out. Second date. Okay, this may make you mad, but the next date has an appearance in my Adventures with George Allman, A Real and Dangerous Nut, Chapter 6. This is not a trick, but as this momentous event was central to that story, it deserves to be there rather than here. So you'll find out about the chapbook. And you know what? I didn't know what a chapbook was until Karen Tippy Toes told me to do it. She said, you should make a chapbook. And I thought it was maybe something that cowboys stuck in their chaps while they were out on the range. Didn't know it was short for chapter, but anyway, that's what it is. Susan Stanley, Part 2. We did have sex, and were immediately comfortable with each other. Probably because I was not obsessing about sex for the first time in 10 years. Sue and I were an item from then on. Giacometti tall and lank-haired, black turtleneck sweaters and black-on-black sunglasses, hiding black-on-black Egyptian makeup. Soon I was puppy dogging her in my own black turtleneck sweater, but not the sunglasses or the eye makeup. Come to think of it, I don't remember anyone who looked like us. So that, plus the fact that we probably looked like twins, had us stand out. All the other cool people hide her whenever we went out. And I was more like arm candy, if you can believe it. But do you know what, in my desire to talk, my random answers to questions turned out to be very amusing. Probably the hashish, what do you think? I was in awe of her for things like the bootleg 45 singles she had, which she said had come from Paul McCartney, who I later found out was her ex. She said, which explained a lot. These were musicians I had not heard of. The Big Bopper, Eddie Cochran, and my favorite, Buddy Holly. Oh, can I make it to the microphone? I don't think so. All my love, all my kissing, you don't know what you've been missing, oh boy. The world can see that you were meant for me. Oh, of course, the Big Bopper. You know what I like. Interlude there. And her dancing, yes. We danced a lot at different places and had lots of sex and were very comfortable together. Perhaps more like the sister I had asked for. Anyway, at one dance, a bridge into the past, as it was in a ballroom of all places. It was crowded and we danced close together, which I was used to. And when the spot waltz was announced, I had no idea, so I faked it, copying what I saw around me. We won a bottle of Johnny Walker Black Whiskey. Remember that, not going to drink like the parents? This event was weird, as the other dances we went to involved so many new and exciting moves by West Indian, East Indian, and North African hipsters. We had lots of sex in her place or mine. I thought the story was about sex, or even love, but now I suspect it is more about intimacy and shared experience, which for all I know are perhaps the same thing. At one point, Sue asked me to keep her seat at the cabin when the Beatles started playing the lunchtime show. That extra exposure to the cabin was probably why I was there to meet Ginny. Sorry, Sue. Have a little note here. Sexual revolution. The 60s were referred to after a while as the era of the sexual revolution, the pill, and more importantly, the second wave of the women's liberation movement. Yay, equality. Now, it's time for Irish. I met Miles Walsh when we were both 15 years old. He was an immigrant from Ireland, the only outsider to enter our narrow community in my lifetime. He was tall and beautiful with glossy black curls and red dots on his cheeks. You could have called him pretty if he didn't have a broken nose. But that too was perfect. Sorry, this is not a gay love story, just a love story. Today I would say he was the very model of a classically Irish country boy, but compared to us, generations of inbreathing and breathing in the constant pollution in the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, open-mouthed, snot-nosed, grey-faced with lank, dirty blonde hair, he wasn't as exotic as a giraffe. He glowed. Next, I'm puzzled why I remember this fact, but I can see the precise spot on the borders of County Wexford and Wicklow where he said he came from, which I found on Google. It's called the Garden of Ireland. Wow, to come into our neck of the no-woods, nothing other than grey. It had to be depressing, but it never seemed depressed. One day, much later, in the 60s, after we'd become friends, he took me somewhere special. We entered an old city building near the centre of Liverpool, and over the door, carved in the coping stone, were the words Irish Centre. I could hear faint music as we entered. This grew louder until we turned into a hall of some kind, and it was special. The actual picture was not special, perhaps a social club just after serving a free lunch to a few of its poorer members, but it was amazing to me because of the music. I swear, my hair stood on end and my heart was racing. There was just a couple of musicians with actual musical instruments and 3 people, 2 very old, 1 very young, rattling what appeared to be rib bones. Oh, and one used a pair of spoons back to back. I've heard of that, playing spoons. Musicians and the audience were all sitting between empty tables near one wall, and in the open space, a handful of old and young were dancing. But really, they were providing the very soul of the music, doing a noisy dance like deliberate stamping. The floor was a giant drumhead. However, it never occurred to me then that even with the name O'Brien, that I was perhaps Irish myself. Miles was, and he was sharing his culture with me, that's all. Years later, I went back to be with my dad, who has died. One day, to take a break, I went with my mum down to the docks, where the city had done a lot of work gentrifying part of the docks that made Liverpool famous. It was very interesting, but apart from learning about the slave trade, yes, there was a little store that had a trace your name service, and we looked up O'Brien that stated that it came from the famous Brian Boru, crowned in 941 on the hill of Tara, the last king of all Ireland. Yes, descended from a king I am. Years later, I went back to, I read that book. Many years later, living in the US, I called my mom, knowing she was not getting any younger, with a few questions. One of those questions was about my family tree. She told me as much as she knew, the names of her families and my dad's back a few generations. I paused a second and said, Devlin, Dolans, they all sound Irish, Mum. She said something like, so? I said, well, I think I asked, why have we never talked about Ireland, Mum? Feeling her discomfort for having no answer, I quickly changed the subject. It did puzzle me, though, and I pondered it for many years before I came to the conclusion that as a result of the English overlords' insistence on potatoes being the #1 crop grown on the island of Ireland, when the potato blight hit, there was not much else left to eat, which resulted in a great famine. A lot of people had to flee the homeland, and how anyone had enough money to get to Canada or Boston or Australia after hundreds of years of near slavery, I don't know, but it seems some did. Many could barely make it to the closest port in England, Liverpool, and when they finally could eat and think, it must have felt like a case of out of the fire and into the out of the pot and into the fire, as now they were in the land of the oppressor, which explains the struggle to assimilate. This, children, is why us Scousers speak with an accent exceedingly rare. Somewhat Irish, but not very English. I'm inside New Brighton Town Hall, seaside town across the Mersey from Liverpool. Semicircular stage, facing a dance area where we were milling about, I guess, because I remember clearly walking from the right to the left side of the stage to see the piano player as he was blocked by the lid of the grand he was playing. He was standing, sometimes jumping, sometimes playing with his back to the keys. He was, I discovered later, the notorious, infamous Jerry Lee Lewis, live in England and driving everyone insane with the wildest music we had ever heard. Wait for it, that's not the shot. Being now at stage right, as well as Jerry, I could see past him back to the gap in the curtain stage left, and there, equally gobsmacked, God, very Liverpool English, was the Beatles. Well, their heads at least, stacked on top of each other, looking as amazed as we felt. Click. There's the shot. They must have opened for Jerry. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire. Soundbite. I heard a rumour that John and Paul had taken 2 buses to the very north of Liverpool, maybe Litherland, to get a special chord from this guy there, F something or other. They are calling it the lost chord. Okay. Of medium height, but so packed with muscle, he seemed wide to explode at any second. Hanif was my hashish dealer. I would meet him under a certain lamp on a certain corner. He was a pre-World War II immigrant from Turkey, and he had the calm center of a sniper, always well dressed, skin the color of olive oil and chocolate. He looked rich, with touches of gold in tooth, pinky, and especially his trademark, his gold cigar holder with amber mouthpiece. One night I asked him if he was afraid to be alone standing there at night. He smiled, just with his lips, and said, "I'm not alone," and reached under the lapel of his expensive top coat. I believed him. He was so convincing I could see a revolver under his left armpit. He was my model of gravitas before James Earl Jones. Finally, the Beatles, a little bit. First time I saw the Beatles was dumbfounding. I think that's the word. I was talking with a friend just around the corner from Matthew Street, which I later discovered was the home of the Cabin nightclub. Our conversation was interrupted by loud screaming, girls screaming, and as we turned to check it out, these four blokes ran from around the other corner and passed us. They were wearing all black, with black leather jackets and high-heeled boots. Their hair was long, as they described it in the early 60s, but really all that meant was that the sides and back were not clipped and the top was not controlled away from the face with brill cream. In fact, it was just like mine, natural, but neater. They disappeared as fast as they arrived. The screaming girls never appeared. Within seconds, life was back to normal again, as if nothing had happened. I turned to my friend and said, "What was that?" He replied, "The Beatles." My girlfriend, my first girlfriend, Susan Stanley, worked downtown, but her lunch hour was 12:30 to 1:30, which was half an hour after the Beatles started their noon show. I remember this because she persuaded me to spend my lunch break sitting in the front row of the cabin eating my lunch and watching them play rhythm and blues and eat their sandwiches. Oh, and smoke cigarettes at the same time, which both disgusted and fascinated me. Sue would arrive at 12:30 and take the seat I had kept warm for her. I would go to the back of the cabin, smoke a cigarette, then go back to the college. A lot of people smoked in those early 60s days. Susan had revealed to me that she had been Paul McCartney's girlfriend until he dumped her, and I guess she still was a big fan. I was not. I hated their music, and them as they were pigs, I rationalized. Maybe I was a little jealous. I had my stereo, my 4 high art albums, I would say. Not at all like that crappy Scouser knockoff blues that the Beatles were pounding out. But the biggest benefit of my favor to Sue, of going to the cabin every day, was that the drummer, Ringo, would frequently hang out at the door before their nighttime gigs. To check the tape, maybe? But one night, as I was about to pay, he just put his hands up. That's where I really saw his rings on every finger for the first time, and said, "He's with us," and took me to the green room. He left to set up his drums, and I just sat there for a while with the other, groupies? Unable to make conversation, I had not figured that art out at that time, I just got up and left. Eventually, I would just walk into the cabin and nobody ever asked me for money. I would go out and sit in the green room for a bit, still dumb, then go dance. The music did get better, and after I had dumped Susan, sorry Sue, I started attending the cabin at night just to see them. Well, that and to dance. I love to dance, especially the twist. It was probably after the Beatles' second tour in Hamburg that I saw Paul sing his rendition of Wooden Heart a la Elvis in German. Beautiful. I remember that night so well as I walked all the way past a line that came up the long stairs from the cabin, which is obviously a cabin, down Matthew Street and disappeared around the same corner I had first seen them appear around. Passing the ticket table, waving to the guys there, and went to the green room for my usual 10 minutes of silence. A great night, especially as it was an all-nighter with the Beatles and a lot of other local bands who I don't remember right now. Oh, there was Jerry and the Pacemakers, who had number one hit, very across the Mersey, within months of the Beatles. Come to think of it, Jerry was Ginny's ex, she said. That's got to mean something. What a natural high to dance all night, then exit the tropical megadecibel bowels of the earth and into the cool early dawn, the silence broken only by the singing of birds and the smell of the Saturday produce market setting up. If I was ever challenged entering the club, I had rehearsed various sentences starting with, "Me and Ringo, me and Ringo, me and Ringo." Thank God no one ever challenged me, because I'm not sure if I could even say that. Ringo has been my almost friend ever since, and I have become a fan of the Beatles. And this was written a few years ago. In fact, these last few weeks, my daughter and I have been starting off most days listening to their White album. Last Saturday, she and I celebrated spring by working on the local irrigation ditch with the community of fellow pacientes, and as I was digging out the weeds, I realized I had been singing "Here Comes the Sun" over and over under my breath. As I stopped from further up the line, I heard her little girl voice singing the same song. Thank you, Ringo. I hope to tell you that in person one day, if ever I am in Malibu at the same time. Lawrence Obi, English gentleman from Nigeria. Christmas break in the college, the thing to do apparently was to go work at the post office as they needed the help. I remember clearly standing on the lower set of outdoor, very steep stairs leading into the back of the post office building downtown. We must have been processed because the line was moving very slowly. At one point, the man in front of me turned and we were eyeball to eyeball. He being much shorter than I was. Even though he was on a step above me, it was a shock to me. It was the first black man I had ever looked face to face with, and his face was very different. A very African face, very black, very round, and it was covered in scars. Not scars from an accident, but deliberate. Torture, perhaps. We spoke, maybe exchanged names, and he introduced himself as Lawrence Obi, and told me in deep, proper English the fact that his grandfather had 68 children. He was a chieftain. Then the line moved on. That started a friendship that I considered my first grown-up friendship. What was quite unique about Lawrence for me was how soon I did not register his facial appearance. What I sure saw was the epitome of an English gentleman. In his room, he had a cricket bat and the pads sticking out of his cricket bag. Another non-Liverpool thing. We became friends and I would hang with Lawrence. He took me to various occasions where there was dancing, and I would dance with these beautifully, mainly huge Nigerian women. Uh-oh, this is how we danced. It was feet movements, okay, like this. I can't sing the song, but it would start like this, and then it would go in a circle like this. And I think this is where the expression came from. We would get down. Low, low. And I was dancing with these beautiful Nigerian, huge Nigerian women for yards and yards of material. And I couldn't tell if the woman I was dancing with was pregnant or fat, or if it was just lots of clothes. But we were down, man. We were really down. This is so odd. From that restricted childhood, suddenly in these various cultures, it was wonderful. So, here we go. So this is where I learned how to move my feet while dancing. On another occasion, he invited me over to this party, and when we were upstairs drinking some very odd Nigerian homebrew beer that his friends had made, I heard this conversation in Igbo with the occasional upstairs and downstairs in English. I asked him what was all that about. He said, oh yes, the last time there was a party, a fight broke out, and it went from upstairs to downstairs. But Igbo has no word for upstairs or downstairs, because all our houses are single story. I went to meet him one time in the pub. He and his friends liked downtown. He was late, and I asked his friends to teach me some Igbo, which is the language of the ethnic group, the Igbo, of Lawrence Obi's group. They taught me a phrase, and I rehearsed it. Lawrence arrived soon after and I said it right away. Instead of being pleased, Lawrence dived across the table at me and had to be restrained by his friends who were laughing uproariously. I had told him to fuck his mother. But I did learn that I have a good short-term memory. Blackbird singing in the dead of night, take these broken wings and learn to fly. All your life you have only waited for this moment to arrive. You know, I wasn't going to include this, but it's most interesting because during this period, I went to hear folk music, which I didn't like at all. I don't know why I was there. But I heard this wonderful instrumental on a penny whistle, and it was called The Blackbird. And when I heard Paul's song about the blackbird, it evoked exactly the same tone that was just quite magical. And I looked up to try and find it, see if I could find this song. Instead I found Paul talking about how the song Blackbird could have been Black Girl. And I was like, oh, that's kind of fitting for this piece of my life. So I just thought I'd share that with you. Blackbird fly into the light of the dark black night. Okay, here we go. Ginny 1. I met Ginny in the cabin. She was teaching a group of perhaps 5 young men how to twist. The chubby checkers do the twist. It was about 5 p.m. While smaller and younger, she was clearly in charge. When she spoke to me, she was convinced by my difficulty speaking that I was from Poland or Hungary. I've been practicing too. She was 16 and I was 18. She gave me a private lesson. I I suspect a lot of you know what the twist is, but just in case, I'll give you a demonstration. It goes, come on, let's twist again, like we did last summer. Come on, let's twist again, like we did last fall, yeah, yeah. But, well, you know what it is, so. I did promise some dancing, that I'm not doing too well. These shoes are difficult. I don't dance enough. Okay. She must have done the amazing transformation that I witnessed some months later when I met her after school. On the top deck of the bus, she hiked up her brown convent school skirt till it became a mini skirt and changed her school shirt for a sexy top. Her makeup, lipstick were all done before the conductor came upstairs to collect fares. And we were ready for town. Me still a boy, she now a grown woman. After the cabin, we both took the number 73 bus. Instead of me getting off my stop, we continued the huge loop into the posh area where she lived. We had just entered the house and I was admiring the kitchen when her mom followed us in with full shopping bags. As soon as she saw me, she made what seemed like a prepared statement. Neither of my daughters will marry until they are 21. Before I could say a word, I was bustled out of the house with a quick peck on the cheek and the door closed on me. I pondered everything on the loop, long loop back to Princess Avenue and to where I belong with the other aliens. Ginny too. In 18 months I had done quite well to have learned how to be an adult human. I had got a flat, got laid, learned to dance, drink, smoke hashish, and from college learned that there were 22 yards in a chain and 10 chains in a furlong and 4 furlongs in a mile. Very useful information.
Yeah.
I was speaking better than when I met Ginny, but even with her teaching, I was still only semi-verbal and half-witted. She didn't write that, but I was. Soon we were apparently going out. And she was amazing, full of life and strength and creativity. At some point, she told me that she had dated Jerry Marsden of Jerry and the Pacemakers. It doesn't have register writing is how odd. Both Susan and Ginny have been with locals who both had hit #1 records on the UK Billboard within months of each other. And Liverpool, it's the first time in Liverpool history we had any kind of hit of anything. Life is illusion, or the Cavern and allied groups were an incestuous little gang. I love sex, but I had no idea of the birds and the bees till she told me she was pregnant. The mating ritual of humans that I had learned from watching Coronation Street, now the longest running soap in the world, came in handy at this point. Watching and doing are two different things, however. "We must elope to Gretna Green," I blurted. It was really quite simple, but our hitched ride near the famous town with the blacksmith who did the marrying over his anvil pointed out there was nothing in Gretna Green in the way of food or lodging. Ooh. He then asked if we'd like to continue on with him to Edinburgh instead. I think his brand new Range Rover clinched it. He dropped us at the busiest street in Edinburgh. We just kept walking along Princes Street. Oh, still Princes with an apostrophe, a different prince figure. Until the city lights were behind us and the pavement and the pitch black turned into grass. I was on familiar ground figuratively. We walked about a quarter mile and made camp. Long day, new country. we were woken by an hello and rapping on the tent pole. The view that greeted me as I opened the flaps was incongruous. 2 Scottish bobbies in the foreground and miles of lush green hills in the background. Upon exiting, the nice policeman pointed behind us and tongue-in-cheek stated that if we did not have a personal invite from Her Majesty the Queen, who was in residence, we should scram. We were 100 yards from Balmoral Castle, the Queen's residence in Scotland. Months later, at my building college forgotten, along with her high school graduation, we were married in the Morningside registry office. Things are going quite well for a couple of kids. Cut to red cast iron phone box on Princess Street. Ginny, who was quite pregnant, had just said hello, then was on the floor. Handset swinging in my face as I bent over her, I heard, "Yes, an old woman," in a pretty good imitation of one. Bitch. I told her to fuck off and picked Ginny up off the floor and carried her home. 3 weeks later, we were living in Mrs. Meredith's house back in Liverpool. Ginny 3. Munchausen syndrome by proxy is the only explanation I have found to explain the asthma Ginny got in her mom's house. I understood though, as I had trouble breathing around here too. It is 1963, I'm 19 years old and it's 3 a.m. In the morning I am barefoot in my pajamas and in the home of my mother-in-law. Yikes. Ginny, my wife, almost 17, is upstairs asleep. I have just finished feeding and burping our baby Nicola, and as I walked up and down the kitchen holding her close to my heart, I was overwhelmed by an amazing unconditional love. The terrible void in my chest I had lived with since I was 3 and divorced my parents is gone, and for the moment all was brilliant in its perfection. The God valve on my heart was wide open and love was gushing through. Fast forward a few months, and after getting a good 3-piece suit kind of job, I am waiting in the apartment I had acquired and furnished. The door opened and I gasped, "Where's the baby?" My godhole valve slammed shut and Ginny never had a chance. Harry buckled. "She was staying with me, Mum, till I'm well enough to take care of her," was a faint whisper across the chasm of banishment. My greatest shame is how I treated that poor girl for the next month. God valve tightly screwed shut again, I forced her back to her mother. That was a war I couldn't win. All I could do was to inflict pain and self-medicate. In those days, the very idea of a kid like me having joint custody didn't exist. I just gave up and drank and drugged some more. Ginny 4. The following year, Ginny arranged a time for me to come over once when Mum was out. Nikki was now walking. She was delightful. She took my finger and led me into the garden, picked a flower and handed it to me. Holding the flower, I promised her when she was old enough I would explain and hopefully we could be together again. We did the year my dad died and she graduated high school. Not knowing what else to do after that summer, I returned to the US and my letters to her were returned to sender. It didn't occur to me that leaving her to live in the home of Mrs. Meredith was a second abandonment. I've called this aspect of myself fancy names, but truly it was total self-absorption. I was back in the hole, and we have not talked since. Okay. The rest is the next 6 years. I went into job after job, and I was totally in denial. Girl after girl, trying to find love, but not really. faking it, never getting it. Then Miles Walsh appeared. I don't know if you mentioned it, but after not seeing him for a number of years, he walked into the Philharmonic bass with a girl who looked like a female version of himself. Either it was his sister, or he was not gay, as we had guessed. He explained he had been waiting for the right person. That seemed totally weird to this sex and love addict. He also told me in the voice that I was vegetating and I had to get out of Liverpool. I prickled but knew he was right. I was, and I accepted his offer to visit him and his wife in London. After a few months deliberating, I took the plunge. Sing a little bit. It's not the leaving of Liverpool that grieves me so, but my darling, when I think of thee. Don't worry, I'm grieving the little girl who grew up, got married, and is living happily ever after as the leader of the wardrobe department of a very well-known theatre in the, get this, the Manchester Royal Cotton Exchange. And I got that Ginny died at the end of COVID in 1922, and we were in touch, but she contacted me. She came to me in a waking dream about a week after she died, and she was in her 20s, and she had this beautiful smile. And I noticed she was wearing a sweater I'd never seen her in, this fluffy cashmere sweater, and she was sending love to me, and all was well. And it happened a week later, where she appeared in a different sweater and did exactly the same thing. So I know that she's doing fine, and Mickey's doing fine, and stay tuned for the next chapter in my saga of life in London. I won't say what the title is because I don't know yet. Thank you all for coming.